So it is the case that, like, from a theoretical perspective, BBM92 is quite secure, but when we move to a real implementation, there are non-ideologies that are introduced that don't necessarily align with the ideal models in theory. So Suparna mentioned some of the ones that are related to actual quantum devices. So, for example, the photon detectors might observe some oddities that introduce vulnerabilities. But even from a classical perspective, the types of messages that are exchanged as part of BBM92 could also introduce vulnerabilities. So one necessary condition as part of BBM92 is that this public classical communication channel between Alice and Bob is authenticated. And so we need to make sure we're using an information theoretically secure mode of authentication there, so that we can actually ensure that when we're talking about the secret keys we're generating, we're actually talking to the right person on the other side. Additionally, practical implementations can introduce other side channels that aren't necessarily covered in a theoretical explanation of BBM92. So let's also consider the case of basis sifting, right? So we collect our measurements, and then we have to talk about, okay, which measurement outcomes actually correspond to the ones obtained by the other side. Well, how do we line these up, right? The BBM92 protocol doesn't take care of when we collect these measurements at different times at these two different sites, how we actually determine which measurements we're actually trying to talk about when considering the basis selection. So in practice, you might use something like timing, synchronization, and time stamping those photon detection events, and then trying to correlate them in that manner by just determining clock offsets or some method. But if we're not careful about the timing information we're revealing when doing that, we can also introduce vulnerabilities in the practical implementation of the protocol. So from a theory perspective, yes, BBM92 is secure, but when we introduce it in a more realistic implementation, there's all of these other things that we need to consider about that might introduce insecurities in the protocol.